we might have something special tomorrow. All I can tell you is it might be special, it might not.
It will be special. Tune in. We're going to be someplace else.
Right.
Exciting.
And by the way, run to the radio if you have to run from the TV. Fox Nation covers us.
Get dressed.
Fox News alert: Dutch police now searching for the gunman behind a deadly shooting in and around a commuter tram in the Netherlands. One person killed and several others wounded. And authorities are not ruling out terrorism at this time. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sandra Smith.
And good morning to you. I'm John Scott in for Bill Hemmer. The shooting happening just before noon local time at a busy intersection in the city of Utrecht. That city now at its highest terror alert level.
Greg Palcott's live from London with the very latest on all of this. Greg, what are we learning?
Sandra, John, this is a moving target right now. Literally, police searching for at least one gunman involved with what they call is a possible terror attack in the heart of this Dutch city, the city of Utrecht. Authorities are now saying that one person has been killed. Several have been injured. We have heard the number 7 as well in reports. And they say there's shootings at multiple locations in the city. And they say they are treating it as if it was a terror attack. Now, the only attack that we know of in detail is the one that you mentioned, guys, and a tram, a streetcar at a busy intersection in the center of the city. Happened about mid-morning, just after rush hour. Eyewitnesses and local media say they saw a man with a, quote, big gun get into the streetcar and start firing at individuals, many of them sitting down in this tram, in the streetcar, and then he fled. Some accounts say he got into a car and went away. Counterterrorism police arrived very quickly. The terror alert in the city put at its highest level, level number 5, which has never happened in this usually peaceful town. Some of the injured are treated at the scene, others taken away by helicopter to hospital. Police now, as we're monitoring these live feeds, guys, seem to be gathering at an apartment complex not too far away from the scene. These are heavily armed police. It looks like perhaps they believe that the individual or individuals are inside. Remember, no suspect has been caught yet. No description of the suspect is circulated. Authorities have also told the people in this city of some 350,000. I've been there. It's a busy place, a lot of industry, there are universities, a lot of people crossing from Belgium, from Germany, a busy crossroads place. Everybody to stay inside. So this city is on lockdown. Again, we are still waiting for more information, what the other attacks could be, anything regarding the suspect, the motivation. Of course, the world has seen terror attacks in the last couple of days. No sign of any linkage to that, but we're tracking this story minute by minute. Back to you guys.
We'll continue to follow all the latest developments from there. Greg Palcott, thank you.
Also tracking new information in the Boeing investigation as data from the flight data recorder, the so-called black box, appears to show a link between 2 deadly crashes in less than 6 months. While the Wall Street Journal reports federal prosecutors and the Department of Transportation are taking a closer look at the development of the Boeing 737 MAX 8 jet. Doug McElroy is live in Washington. So initial suspicions, Doug, are pointing toward the flight control system, the MCAS. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it stands for Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. It is an automated control of the plane's trim system, the first such automated system in any Boeing airplane, while they're very common among Airbuses. The MCAS is designed to compensate for the bigger engines on the MAX 8, which necessitated moving the engines slightly forward so they fit under the wing, changing the MAX 8's center of gravity and therefore its handling characteristics. When the MAX 8 is given full power, the nose tends to pitch up. The MCAS neutralizes that by trimming the tail flaps downward. The initial findings suggest clear parallels to the Ethiopian air crash last week to the Lion air crash 5 months ago. Data finds that in both planes, the MCAS was trimmed to force the nose down. Debris at the crash site also indicates the tail flaps were in a nose-down position. But in that first crash, we also know that the MCAS was acting on an erroneous information from a malfunctioning sensor that indicates the plane's pitch and angle of attack. In a statement, Boeing's CEO said, while investigators continue to work to establish definitive conclusions, Boeing is finalizing its development of a previously announced software update and pilot training revision that will address the MCAS flight control law's behavior in response to erroneous sensor inputs. Now, keep in mind that these initial reports are coming from the lead agency, Ethiopia's transport ministry. There has been some friction between U.S. representatives and Ethiopia's investigators who have expressed some dislike of the NTSB, which is generally regarded as the world's leading safety investigative agency, John.
And there are reports of a federal probe in this country into the MAX 8 and its development, Doug?
Yes, there is. The Wall Street Journal is reporting this morning that a grand jury in Washington on March 11th issued a subpoena to at least one person involved in the MAX 8's development. The subpoena seeks correspondence, emails, and other communications related to the certification of the plane. It's unclear whether the Journal report is related to a DOT Inspector General report that focuses on the safety system that's been connected to these two crashes. John?
Doug McKelway in Washington. Thanks, Doug.
I have the most progressive record of anybody running for the United States, if anybody who would run. I didn't mean... Than anybody who would run.
All right, well, that was former Vice President Joe Biden over the weekend, almost announcing a 2020 White House run in Delaware this weekend as the field of Democratic candidates grows yet again, with New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand officially entering the presidential race. Byron York is chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner and a Fox News contributor. Byron, good morning to you. All right,
morning,
so
Sandra.
for most have assumed for a while now that Joe Biden will be entering this race. Perhaps that was a little slip on his part there. But more importantly, what did we learn about his message as a potential candidate this weekend?
Well, we just heard it. Most people focused on the little slip that indicated that maybe really is running. But the most important thing he said there was that he claimed to have the most progressive record of any candidate in the field. And this is really a recognition by Biden that the Democratic Party has changed a lot since he has been in politics. Beto O'Rourke was not old enough to vote when Joe Biden first ran for president in 1988. And the party has changed certainly since then, and even since Biden was Barack Obama's vice president, elected in 2008 and 2012. And basically Biden has to catch up with the Democrats who are talking about a Green New Deal, who are talking about Medicare for all, who are talking about different tax rates, much higher tax rates. So calling himself progressive is really a way for Biden to say, I'm in this group today.
Meanwhile, the big money is rolling in for those who have officially announced that they are running for president. You look at the numbers for Beto O'Rourke, and they're big. He managed to raise over $6.1 million after declaring his long-anticipated bid for the presidency. Within 24 hours of announcing his run, he narrowly beat the first-day haul of Senator Bernie Sanders, as you can see, $5.9 million. But Beto O'Rourke outpacing his rivals. What does this early surge in fundraising numbers tell us about the race?
Well, it shows that O'Rourke still has it. I mean, one of the big things about his race against Ted Cruz, in which he narrowly lost that Senate race in Texas, was that O'Rourke raised $80 million for a state Senate race. It was kind of a national fundraising machine, really, of small donations from around the country. And the question was, would those donors still be as excited about O'Rourke in the context of a presidential race with a lot of other candidates? And the answer is yes. $6.1 million is a lot, better than Bernie Sanders, who's really the previous king of the small donations, who got $5.9 million. Took Amy Klobuchar 2 days to raise $1 million. Kamala Harris raised $1.5 million in her first day. So O'Rourke and Sanders really are far ahead of the other candidates when it comes to raising money.
You know, it's interesting. He had a weekend of stumbles. You don't have to look far out there to see the headlines that he had some gaffes. You look back at some of the words that he said in the initial hours after he announced his presidency. That Vanity Fair piece saying he was born to be in it. Amy Klobuchar, while she prefaced her criticism of that by saying she's got a lot of respect for Beto, he has not been without his gaps already in his early run here.
You know, I think that some of this is just people, reporters and other candidates looking for stumbles early on, and these all do not add up to a whole lot. I do think of the apologies that he made. Perhaps the one in Vanity Fair was the most significant, in which he seemed to apologize for being a white man and said that he would, quote, totally understand if other voters chose not to vote for him because he is a white man, and promised to have a very diverse staff. And I would assume that if he were to win the nomination, there's no way in the world his running mate would be a white man. So I think that what we've seen here is an effort for Beto O'Rourke to sort of fit himself into how he views not only the Democratic electorate now, but the other people in his field.
We'll finish with him backpedaling on that comment. Here's Beto.
I was like, man, I hope I didn't say that. I'm born to serve. I'm born to try to help bring people together. So I don't know that anyone is born for an office or position, and I certainly am not.
And finally, Kirsten Gillibrand, she's officially in the race. There's Beto, now Kirsten Gillibrand, and she went after the president. She didn't mention him by name in her video announcement, but you can see where she's already going. Final thoughts from you this morning, Byron.
Well, the Gillibrand announcement, the formal announcement, didn't make a lot of waves because she had said a while back that she was exploring a run. And I mean, how many people say they're exploring a run and then don't do it? Not as frequent. But so Gillibrand is one of the ones, a fairly big name senator, who has not made a big splash in this race so far.
Her video was titled Brave Wins. All right, well, heck of a weekend there. Byron York, thank you for kicking things off with us this morning.
Thank you, Sandra.
For the record, Bruce Springsteen was born to run, and he embraces
How did I know that was coming?
What do you think about that Joe Biden thing? Was that a slip?
A mistake? I don't know.
Think so. I think that was.
When is the announcement coming?
We'll see.
Keeping us guessing.
Australian police raid the homes of the accused New Zealand mosque shooter's mother and sister as the White House sounds off on attempts to tie President Trump to the terror attack. Plus, this.
For 3 days, we were an island by ourselves. We could not get in or out of Columbus proper.
Widespread evacuations as one state sees the worst flooding in half a century, and the worst may be yet to come.
Plus, North Korea threatens to end nuclear talks, saying it has no plans to yield to American demands. What happens next? House Foreign Affairs member Adam Kinzinger is joining us.
The fact that we didn't get a deal in Vietnam doesn't mean that the relationship was in peril. It just means there was no deal to be had at that time. Doesn't mean there's not an agreement we can make in the future. I think the resumption of the missile testing would be seen as a sort of a violation of some sort of breach of trust. I think there was a general understanding that there was no reason for that to continue as long as we were continuing to have conversations, and the conversations continue.
So that's the view of the White House responding to reports that North Korea might resume weapons testing with nuclear talks now in limbo. Pyongyang accuses U.S. officials of creating a hostile atmosphere that led to the abrupt end of President Trump's summit with Kim Jong-un last month. Let's bring in Congressman Adam Kinzinger. He serves on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Does it sound like Kim Jong-un is serious about possibly resuming, or is this a bit of face-saving, do you think?
You know, it's hard to tell. This is not a surprise. This is kind of how North Korea's been doing things from the very beginning. I mean, even from when, Bill Clinton cut the big deal with North Korea, the food for stopping their nuclear program. So it's not really surprising. I don't think this is where we need to necessarily hit the panic button yet. I do think the administration should show what they're doing right now, which is we're going to get tough. We're not joking around on this. I think a resumption of the war games, the military exercises would probably be the right thing, and also continuing to enforce those sanctions. But the thing we have to keep in mind is, remember, the Iran nuclear deal, as bad as that was, but that played out behind closed doors. This is kind of the same principle where you're trying to cut a deal, but it's playing out in the open. So there'll be a lot of ups and downs, and hopefully this is just a down and an overall good finish.
More firm words from the White House. Listen to the Secretary of State talking about his expectations for the Kim regime.
In Hanoi, on multiple occasions, he spoke directly to the president and made a commitment that he would not resume nuclear testing, nor would he resume missile testing. So that's Chairman Kim's word. We have every expectation that he will live up to that commitment.
That's a not-so-veiled threat to the chairman that if he decides to resume testing, there's going to be trouble, isn't it?
Yeah, and Secretary Pompeo's exactly right. You know, when you get to the point where you're going to meet with the President of the United States, you're going to promise him that you're not going to resume testing in exchange for these negotiations. The President was absolutely right to walk away when he did in Vietnam. And we've said from the very beginning, the end state here is that North Korea will not have a nuclear weapons program. That's not a surprise to Kim. That's something we've been very clear about. Now, what do we take to get to that? What's going to be the carrots, if you will, or the sticks? And so I think Secretary Pompeo is right. And if Kim wants to play this game of resuming testing to try to threaten the United States again, I think he's going to see that he might, you know, underpredict our behavior because he has in the past. In the past, we've been a little weak. I don't think we're going to be this time. So hopefully this is just a blip and maybe a Kim failed negotiation strategy. But I think ultimately North Korea will not have nuclear weapons. Let's just see how we get to that point.
Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson is saying that there are more screws that could be tightened against the Kim regime if they decide to resume testing. Here's what he had to say on Sunday Morning Futures.
What brought Chairman Kim to the negotiating table were these sanctions. We need to ratchet them up. Let's not make the same mistakes we made in Iran, where sanctions brought to the table, but then we relieved those and we didn't actually force Iran into negotiating in good faith. Right now, Chairman Kim is not negotiating in good faith. He has to come to a different conclusion.
It sounds like you and the senator are on the same page when it comes to the possibility of increasing sanctions.
Yeah, we are. If you think about people like Kim Jong-un or, you know, Vladimir Putin for that matter, what they fear the most is losing power. All of this is about maintaining their tight control on their population. Kim, if the sanctions get worse and he continues to feel the economy slipping away and his grip on power slipping away, that's his motivation to come to the table. And so whether it's actually punishing China for sanction violations, whether it's using the Navy for stopping any cargo coming in, illicit cargo, there's a lot that we can do that, you know, we've kept the sanctions in place, but there have been a lot more violations, and we've kind of probably not really enforced as hard as we should because we're in the negotiating. Well, we can get back to enforcing those and make it pretty painful on Kim.
Congressman Adam Kinzinger, member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. It's good to have you on. Thank you.
Yep, see ya.
An American Navy veteran sentenced to 10 years in prison in Iran. Are rising tensions between Washington and Tehran the reason behind his sentence? His lawyer will join us live to weigh in on the fight to free him. Also, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar writing an op-ed calling for a more inclusive foreign policy after her controversial comment. Devastating flooding in the Midwest. At least 3 people are dead as dams failed and rivers overflowed, forcing residents out of their homes in Nebraska and Iowa. Many people had to be rescued from the rising waters. Alicia Cunha has the latest on all of this. Alicia?
Hi, Sandra. Yeah, and one of those people who died, it was someone who was just swept away in the floodwaters. Another, a man who was helping other people, and a bridge collapsed on him. The National Weather Service is calling this major and historic river flooding. You've got governors in Iowa, Nebraska, and Wisconsin all declaring states of emergency. Take a look at what we're seeing in Nebraska right now, where folks have been forced from their homes. The state officials say rivers are at record levels. Roads and bridges are washed out, and more rain is forecast. The snow melt, runoff, and rains contributing to this deluge of water hitting these communities. And as is typical with a natural disaster, there are some who do not heed the warnings by officials to get out of their homes. Nebraska's Emergency Management Agency is telling folks if they ignore the evacuation recommendations, getting them out later may be delayed. The community of Fremont, Nebraska has been cut off by rising water.
We are trapped. We can't get in or out of Fremont, and so planes are flying in supplies from all over, little Learjets and Cessnas, and then they're unloading them and bringing them here, and then we're distributing them to churches and the middle school where there's a shelter there and anyone that needs that.
In Iowa, it's a similar story with more than 2,000 people right now out of their homes. Here's the state's governor.
You know, it's significant damage. Almost every levee south of Council Bluffs to the Missouri border has been breached. And so, you know, that's something that we're going to have to deal with going forward. How do you, how do you fix them?
The National Weather Service says these conditions are likely to extend into Wednesday. Sandra.
Alicia Acuna, thank you.
More violence in Paris this weekend as Yellow Vest protests enter a fourth month. How President Trump is reacting after rioters torched banks and shops protesting President Macron's economic policies. Plus, the White House reacting after the suspect in the New Zealand massacre called President Trump a symbol of renewed white identity in a posted manifesto. A live report from Washington next.
That's just absurd to say that there's some type of connection between being against illegal immigration, which is what the veto was about, for legal immigration, and the ruthless live streaming of murder of 15 people.
Alert, we are awaiting Dutch authorities, including the Prime Minister, expected to hold a news conference on the deadly shooting in the Netherlands. One person killed, as we know at this time, several others wounded, when a gunman opened fire in and around a commuter tram in the city of Utrecht this morning. Police say they are searching for a 37-year-old Turkish man. They're not ruling out terrorism at this time. We're going to bring you more information as we get it. A press conference will begin shortly.
New Zealand police now say a gunman who killed 50 people at 2 mosques acted alone, but might have had support as security measures are ramped up across that country.
You will see a highly visible police presence on the streets, around your businesses, around your schools, and even in the air, right across the country. So you will feel safe to go about what you want to do.
As the White House works to keep President Trump from being tainted by the attack, the suspect mentioned the president in his anti-immigrant manifesto. But acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney insists the president is not a white supremacist, telling Fox News Sunday that it's absurd to suggest the president's political rhetoric influenced the attack.
I don't think it's fair to cast this person as a supporter of Donald Trump any more than it is to look at his his eco-terrorist passages in that manifesto and align him with Nancy Pelosi or Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. This was a disturbed individual, an evil person, and to sit to try and tie him to an American politician of either party probably ignores some of the deeper difficulties that this sort of activity exposes.
Kevin Corke is live at the White House for us. Kevin, fair to say there is a healthy dose of frustration there at the White House over those trying to tie the attack to the president.
Manifestly so. And in particular, John, when you think about how it sort of ties a nasty narrative among the president's political opponents to him. By the way, White House officials say that's unfair, it's untrue, and it is certainly unwarranted. But this is also happening, as you know, amid the carnage and the devastation in New Zealand. The nation is hurting there, and the Muslim community worldwide is still coming to grips with the evil that struck its members in that beautiful country. And it's against that backdrop that has White House officials saying when it comes to blaming this country's president for shootings here and elsewhere, look, enough is enough.
To simply ask the question every time something like this happens overseas, or even domestically, to say, oh my goodness, it must somehow be the president's fault, speaks to a politicization of everything that I think is undermining sort of the institutions that we have in the country today.
Yeah, I don't give any credibility whatsoever to the ramblings of somebody who's rotten to the core and clearly is an extremist of the worst kind who could walk into 2 mosques and without any care whatsoever kill people.
Placing blame where it belongs on the perpetrator of that violence, John.
The president, Kevin, is also taking to Twitter to complain about the Mueller report and the creation of a special counsel. Tell us about that.
Yeah, you're going to see a lot more tweets like this, and certainly you and I have talked about this at length, this idea that the very genesis of the Mueller report, frankly, should never have happened if you agree with the way the president is describing how this entire process played out. Again, he has said this on Twitter. Let me share this tweet. It's lengthy, so follow along as the president sort of lays out his case. He says, so if there was knowingly and acknowledged to be zero crime when the special counsel was appointed, and if the appointment was made based on the fake dossier paid for by crooked Hillary and now disgraced Andrew McCabe, he and all stated no crime, then the special counsel should never have been appointed, and there should be no Mueller report. This was an illegal and conflicted investigation in search of a crime. And then he ends with this: Russian collusion was nothing more than an excuse by the Democrats for losing an election that they thought they were going to win. This should never happen to a president again. Now, critics will obviously argue the investigation was warranted because of a number of contacts between Trump campaign staffers and those who may have had ties to the Kremlin. May have had, which is part of the frustration, John. By the way, we won't see the president until the Greek Independence Day event tonight at around 5:45. If he happens to come out here before then, I'll let you know. But for now, back to you.
And we're all waiting for that report. Some people think the Attorney General might already have it. We'll see.
Could be.
Kevin Corke, thank you.
Meanwhile, French officials vowing to crack down on a resurgence of riots in Paris after so-called yellow vest protesters trashed and torched shops and clashed with police during the 18th straight weekend of demonstrations. President Trump tweeting this morning about the chaos there, writing, quote, "How is the Paris Environmental Accord working out for France after 18 weeks of rioting by the yellow vest protesters? I guess not so well. In the meantime, the United States has gone to the top of all lists on the environment." Our next guest worked directly with President Trump when the U.S. pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. Joining us now is Mandy Gunasekera, former EPA Deputy Assistant Administrator. Mandy, appreciate your time this morning. Really something to see what is playing out there with the 18th straight weekend now of these protests. I mean, you're talking Champs-Elysees throwing stones at police. Shops are getting ruined there. You can see windows coming down. I mean, it's a mess in Paris.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sandra. This is what could have happened here if we had stayed in the Paris Agreement. And the problem is that their political leadership are advancing. They are undermining their economic interests in the name of environmental progress. But the problem is they aren't even achieving environmental progress. What my message to the French leadership is they should shred the Paris Agreement and they should work with President Trump to figure out how to grow the economy in historic ways while advancing successful environmental progress.
Well, as we know, these protests began and the violence began as protests against the planned fuel tax increases. And Emmanuel Macron has responded with this statement, Mandy. Many things have been done since November, but today shows that on these matters, we are not there. I want to make strong decisions as soon as possible so that this does not happen. What has Macron been doing there to channel their anger?
I don't think he's been doing a very good job. What Macron should do is what President Trump does very well, which is listen to the people of his country instead of the aloof politicians and advisors around him. You have to place the wisdom of your people first, and what they want more than anything else is economic progress. So Macron has gone around and he's tried to have these listening sessions, but they haven't worked out very well. In the meantime, President Trump, who came to leadership promising to listen to and placing the interests of the American people first, listening to American workers, has grown the economy in historic ways, averaging 3% GDP growth, something unseen in the last administration, while significantly propping up the economic prosperity of American manufacturers, creating millions of jobs, and advancing environmental goals. We lead the world in greenhouse gas emission reductions. From 2005 to 2017, the United States reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 14%, while the rest of the world grew their emissions 20%. So again, my message is to the French president and other signers of the Paris Agreement, those type of agreements don't really work. What they should do is come back to this country, listen to President Trump, and see how you really effectively balance economic prosperity while advancing environmental progress.
So Macron's team is making the case that while they're increasing the public debate on this, the turnout at these protests, while still violent over the weekend, have been declining. Meanwhile, you bring it back here home, Mandy, and I want to play some of this sound from over the weekend. This is Pete Buttigieg. He's the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, a presidential candidate, and he is trying, he says, to broaden the conversation about the environment back here at home. Here he is on with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday.
what the world's going to look like in 2054 when I get to the current age of the current president. And if we don't act aggressively and immediately on climate, it's not going to be a pretty picture. This timetable isn't being set in Congress. It's being set by reality. It's being set by science. And it's going to hit, those deadlines are going to hit in our climate with or without us. And so we have to act.
So he's making the case, Mandy, that in his words, there's already a very passionate community of interest on this subject as he makes his run for the presidency. But he thinks it's important to broaden the conversation beyond environmentalists. What did you make of what he said over the weekend?
So I think he has a valid point. The problem is that we have already made significant environmental gains here in this country. And before talking about what we should do next, people need to be honest about where we are. Again, we lead the world in greenhouse gas emission reductions. We lead the world in terms of having the cleanest air on record and investing billions of dollars in clean water infrastructure. President Trump is a man about action, not about making promises that sound good but don't actually produce results. So broadening the conversation, again, it's a valid point, but we need to be realistic and appreciative of where we actually are today.
All right, great to get your thoughts on that. Mandy Guinness-Acara, thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.
All right. John?
All right, not getting much done at work today. Join millions of other workers, so-called, spending this morning filling out their office March Madness brackets.
Oh, boy.
The field for men's college basketball tournament announced this weekend. Duke, no surprise, the overall top seed and one of 3 regional #1 seeds, along with North Carolina and Virginia. The first games tip off tomorrow.
This is where Hammer would be going nuts about Duke and how well they're playing. So what do you do here? Are you in one?
I am not in one. I have not wasted any time filling out my bracket this morning.
A lot of people will be doing that today at the office. All right, we'll leave it there. Meanwhile, all of Washington remains on edge as Robert Mueller's report on the Russian election interference could be out any day now to the Attorney General. We are watching and waiting.
That he wants to release as much as possible to make sure that this gets behind us and we move forward. We know, and you know, as you've it was a political stunt by the Democrats who thought that they could divide Republicans into voting no upon it. They have no agenda. They have nothing that they can actually put on the floor. So they wasted an entire week of the American taxpayers' dollar to actually put a report on the floor that said nothing basically except the same thing the regulations say that Mr. Barr needs to do.
That's Georgia Congressman Doug Collins sounding off on the House resolution to release the Mueller report to the public. It passed unanimously, as you might know, but it's blocked in the Senate by Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham. Let's bring in John Sununu, former New Hampshire governor and former White House chief of staff to President George H.W. Bush. A lot of people were surprised by that unanimous House vote. Were you?
No, not at all. It is clear that the Democrats have become the party of bread and circuses, and this was another part of the circus component. They're offering everything free to the world, and now they're doing all kinds of crazy things with the power they have in the House. Surprisingly, the only adult comment since the November elections from Democrats came from Nancy Pelosi when she talked about the folly and futility and the wrongness of chasing the impeachment route. But this thing with the Mueller report has the Democrats completely flummoxed. They don't know how to handle it, and they got outfoxed by the Republican vote.
Well, the law says that the special counsel is supposed to hand this report to the Attorney General of the United States, who then decides whether or not to release it or how much of it to release. Would you advocate that it be released in its entirety?
I advocate that the Attorney General do what he thinks is the right thing. The Democrats have a real problem. The president appointed a very smart Attorney General, someone who understands the law, someone who understands politics, someone who understands Washington. And I have absolute confidence that Attorney General Barr is going to do this in a way that puts full transparency on the process and deals with the political games that the Democrats may want to play with it.
So Senator Lindsey Graham is holding this thing up in the Senate because he says he wants another special counsel appointed to look into things like the Clinton email server. Would you like to see another special counsel?
I would like to see an investigation carried out in an honest way on what was done by the Clinton campaign. I think it probably could be done by the Attorney General and the Justice Department, but I understand Lindsey Graham doing what he's doing there. The interesting thing is that Lindsey is going to be dealing with a Democrat contingency in the Senate that will probably be depleted by 6 or 7 almost every day for the next 2 years as those Democrat senators run for president. It's going to be circus time.
A House Democrat, an Oversight Committee member, Harley Ruda, says that the House still needs to continue these investigations. Listen to this.
We can't use bad actors from the Clinton administration or otherwise as justification for not doing our job. I sometimes feel like this is like a middle school kids that are trying to justify their behavior by pointing to past behavior of others and saying, well, they did it too, so I'm allowed to do it.
What do you think about that? Democrats are saying that some of the past misdeeds are coming to light here, I guess.
Look, the Democrats don't know how to handle the responsibilities they got in the last election. And all it takes for any backbench Democrat to come and get a little bit of TV time is to say something ridiculous. So we had an unknown Democrat, nobody ever heard of, getting a little bit of TV time on Fox by saying something that is meaningless.
All right. The former U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara says that he doesn't think the Mueller investigation is necessarily wrapping up. Said that, you know, the fact that Rick Gates is still cooperating, this thing might still be going on for quite some time. What would you say to that?
Preet Bharara is the legal arm, even though he's out of his responsibilities now, is the legal arm of the Democrat National Committee. Anything that comes from him is a hard political statement.
He's the former U.S. attorney in New York City who was essentially ushered out of the job by President Trump, which is not unusual when a new president takes office. Former Governor John Sununu, it's good to have you on. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
President Trump ramping up pressure on General Motors as the auto giant closes a big plant in Ohio. So can pressure from the president get GM to change its mind? And for years, you've heard that an aspirin a day might help prevent heart attacks. But that advice is changing. Dr. Mark Siegel will join.
In Austria, lighting up what it says is the world's largest bonfire. Organizers spent 3 months building this structure, and it burned to the ground in less than half an hour. Austria has a tradition of lighting bonfires to celebrate the arrival of spring.
Lovely. All right, for years now, we've heard a daily dose of aspirin could reduce your risk of heart attacks and strokes, but that is no longer the recommendation for healthy older adults. Dr. Mark Siegel is a professor of medicine at NYU Langone Medical Center and a Fox News contributor. Dr. Siegel, I mean, we've been hearing this for years. This advice is changing now?
It's guidelines, and we've been hearing it so much that 40% of all adults, Sandra, are actually taking a baby aspirin a day to prevent heart attacks and strokes, and it does work. The problem is that over the age of 70 especially, it increases your risk of bleeding, and the kind of bleeding we really worry about that could lead to hospitalization and death. So the reason that this is being rethought by the American Heart Association and the American College of Cardiology is, A, the risk of bleeding, and the second part of this is good news, which is we've done a great job at controlling some of the risk factors, Sandra, that lead to heart attack and stroke. We're controlling cholesterol like never before with drugs like Lipitor and Crestor and diet change. We're also getting less Americans to smoke, and we're controlling blood pressure better than before. So the thinking is if you can control the major risk factors for heart disease, you're going to get less heart attacks and death from heart disease without that aspirin and without the risks that aspirin gives you.
But still, in some cases, are doctors recommending this practice for older adults?
In many cases. Great point, because that's what it's always supposed to be. The message here isn't don't stop your aspirin. The message here is go over it with your physician and do a cost-benefit thinking on this and figure out if you should take it or not. That's what it always should have been. It should never have been patients going to the pharmacy and starting themselves on aspirin. This is a wake-up call for that kind of interaction. What's your risk of bleeding? And what's your benefit from this? Between the ages of 50 and 70, it's still a good group to be saying if you're at high risk of heart disease, you may need a baby aspirin. So we're not going to take everybody off it. We're going to take some people off.
Just have about a minute left here, Dr. Siegel. So if you're someone who's currently taking this aspirin every day, should you just stop now? Or I'm sure you're going to tell us everybody should consult their doctor.
I'm not going to tell anybody to stop. What I'm going to tell is people should exercise more. They should improve their diet more. They should get their blood pressure down. They should lose weight. If we can get people to lose weight, then they may not need all these preventions. And then, of course, talk to your doctor. Nobody that's on aspirin right now should stop. But this is a time for more conversation on it. Lifestyle changes are the key. Stop smoking, please. And if you remain at high risk, especially if you have diabetes, by the way, Sandra, if you have diabetes, you may very well need to stay on that aspirin. I want to make one more point, which is that you may have heart disease and not know it. I'm not just talking about people with angina. People might have it and not know it. They may still need the aspirin, but consult your doctor.
Got it. And prevention is key. Dr. Siegel, thank you.
Change your life. Great to see you, Sandra.
Good advice. It looks as if the 2020 Democratic presidential field is still growing. One more candidate officially joins the race, while another may have dropped a major hint. We'll look at the frontrunners next.